Multi-hazards, all about protecting communities.
This ain't no one-way ticket. Welcome to the thicket of brainwaves and epiphanies, grown men crying and matriarchs winning. Join this fight to protect your kin, your knaves, strong and weak, especially the vulnerable. Multi-hazards is in the house. I ain't here to give you a run-around bull. Join us, friends, sign up to battle. Climate change, human rage, all the sheep and all the cattle. Playing games while nature flames, floods and blows, with all the cracks and hacks and terror foes. We're here to win. Hi, this is the Multi-Hazards Podcast. Vin Nelson here. This is one of the rare gems on the internet where we take a deep dive into issues in emergency management, climate change, adaptation, security, etc. And the overarching objective here, my life goal too, is protecting communities. So I'm very thrilled today. Welcome everybody. Very thrilled today to have a wonderful, awesome guest, Irvin Studin. He is the president of the Institute for 21st Century Questions, a vision and strategy think tank based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, with activities around the world. And he is the founder, the editor-in-chief, and publisher of Global Brief magazine, a top-tier international affairs magazine with a heavy global readership. He is also with the Chez Raoul Dandurand at the Université du Québec à Montréal, and has been a professor of public policy in leading universities in North America, Europe, and Asia. He co-founded Ukraine's Higher School of Public Administration in Kiev and sits on the External Advisory Board of the Canadian Foreign Service Institute, Canada's Diplomatic Academy. His recent book is called Russia, Strategy, Policy, and Administration. This is from Palgrave-Macmillan, publisher. He has several forthcoming books which will deal with strategic issues. Between 2002 and 2006, he worked for the Privy Council Office, the Prime Minister's Department in Ottawa, Canada, as well as in the Australian Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet in Canberra, Australia. He is a past Rhodes Scholar and Governor-General's Gold Medal winner. And he was the first ever recruit of the Canadian government's Recruitment of Policy Leaders program and a member of the small team that wrote Canada's 2004 National Security Policy. He was the principal author of Australia's 2006 National Counter-Terrorism Policy while on secondment in the Australian Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet, the National Security Division. He consults, and his agency is called Student Advisory Services, Inc., lectures and teaches around the world in a number of languages, and has written for publications ranging from the Financial Times to Le Monde, Vedomosti, the Globe and Mail, the Australian, and the South China Morning Post. In a past life, he was a high-performance athlete, all-Canadian, and captain on the York University men's varsity soccer team, 2 Blues with Oxford University's men's football/soccer team, and a member of the professional Toronto Lynx Soccer Club, predecessor to the Toronto FC. Well, dear listeners, it's my custom here on each and every Multi-Hazards podcast to offer a territorial acknowledgement for everyone around, acknowledging that this land where I live and podcast from is not mine, nor does it belong to any Europeans, Asians, Africans, or anybody else here. No, it is First Nations land, and I will tell you specifically whom here. And the text I use is from our local Kwantlen Polytechnic University, or KPU, and here we go. We work, study, and live in a region south of the Fraser River, which overlaps with the unceded traditional and ancestral lands of the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Katzie, Semiahmoo, Tsawwassen, Kikite, and Coquitlam peoples. These are the names of various First Nations groups around me here in what we call the lower mainland of southwest British Columbia. We also call it Greater Vancouver or Metro Vancouver, and it's here on the west coast of Canada. Now, without further ado, let's get to this awesome interview. Welcome, everybody, to Multi Hazards. I am really thrilled to have Irvin Studin here, and he's all the way from Ontario. And how are you doing, Irvin?
Very well, Vin. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Now, I have to say that I found out on your LinkedIn, I think you have a PhD somewhere in your long past history. Is that right?
Regrettably, yes.
Okay, but I notice you don't flash around the PhD in your online presence, so that's kind of surprising in this day and age. But because it's on LinkedIn, everybody's like, "Look at the certificate I got! Look what I did! Look what I." And you get kind of, yeah. I'm influenced by the old Chinese culture where they used to kind of keep things under the hat, right, and let people discover it by themselves. But anyways,
Right.
so I can call you Irvin. That's all right.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, so here we are, and Irvin he's from Ontario. Now, I saw him because I've been working with immigrants and refugees here in British Columbia for many, many years. And now I've been trying to get into emergency management and climate change adaptation. And of course, the whole idea about climate migration, forced migration, mind you, has come up because of a lot of places are becoming unbearably hot right now. And yeah, that's how I found Irvin online. So how are you doing in these crazy COVID times? I think Ontario has it's kind of loosened up a bit, has it?
I'm personally doing fine. My family's fine, and Ontario's largely doing fine. We're easily on the right track. The country is largely doing fine. If you just look at it from the COVID perspective, where it gets more complicated is if you add all the other systems of life and society and country to it, then Ontario, like easily the rest of the country, is not doing so well. So on strictly on the COVID parameter or metric, we're doing fine and we'll be fine. But many other systems are collapsing or on the verge of collapse provincially and nationally. So that's a big worry.
Yeah, that is. That's when you study these things too many times, I have a hard time sleeping sometimes. Anyways, let's get back to the 100 million idea. Now I was like going online searching for this, and I actually found there's this whole like organization that's dedicated to it. I don't even think they're connected to you, but this 100 million idea has come up. Now, I think it's funny because I saw David Suzuki around 4 or 5 years ago on YouTube, and he was like, we're getting too many immigrants because look at Canada's ecosystems. They just can't handle it, right? So,
Right.
and I do see like a lot of pollution here in Vancouver from all the trucks and ships, and look over the Fraser River on a July afternoon, and there's a lot of pollution hanging there. However, it's nothing compared to some cities I've seen in Asia. And you have good arguments for this 100 plus million over many, many decades. So yeah, I was actually studying climate change adaptation at Waterloo at a course last year. And then that's when I ran into all your arguments there, especially when you're looking at 50 years ahead of time. So I'm just wondering, where did this 100 million idea come from, Irvin?
Well, I would probably say humbly that in terms of the modern debate over the last decade plus, it starts from my own work. An article I wrote in Global Brief magazine, which I had, called Canada Population 100 Million. It was a meditation essentially on what the future could look like, in an argument for a bigger, mightier, more capacious, more energetic, creative Canada. And it had no specific policy or political ambition ascribed. It was strictly a meditation, but always with the idea that we could do more with more if it's properly choreographed and managed. And that's a very important proviso. After that, I became much more, I would say, surgical with the arguments. And now the arguments are pretty, I'd say, algorithmic from my side. But many, many strands of thinking on 100 million have spawned since then. I think Doug Saunders came up with a book on it called Maximum Canada.
Yeah, I saw that
a couple years
on
ago.
Twitter.
Then well, it's a real book. The book was, I think, he
Yeah.
promoted it on Twitter, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not on Twitter that much. But then the Century Initiative was started very much on the basis of my own work in Toronto about 4 or 5 years ago. They have their own life and their own project, but the original thinking came from the 100 million, both peace and arguments. And then I think many, both intellectuals and practitioners, have migrated in favor of that position. If you hold that 100 million is a symbolic quantum, it's not, no one is wed to 100 million strictly. It could be more, it could be less, but we'd need more people, and we need to do more with the country with that greater capacity. So most recently, Brian Mulroney came out probably a week or two ago with a piece in the Globe and Mail and about a post-COVID Canada that has 85 million people. Now, I'm sure he was migrating to the position that I'd been advocating, but 85 is his preferred quantum. Andrew Coyne has come up with 100 million arguments. And I think across the political spectrum, even on the conservative side, the 100 million is developing. I would, far from a consensus, but allure in terms of the what I call the strategic imagination it suggests for the country. And let me just take off from that note. The idea is, can you imagine a more capacious Canada that really plays at a bigger level, that's better able to manage its territory, its interests? And now, with both climate change in the north and the great powers playing at our doorsteps on all sides, and I think in British Columbia that's pretty plain that that's happening, we're going to just need more assets to do that. And Canada, in my view of things, has all the assets of a major player and a major power, but two. One is a sufficiently large population for our territory, and two, what I call a term-setting mindset. Along with that population, a mindset and a leadership mindset where we can form some global debates, set the terms for different global dynamics, solve problems in a persuasive, commanding way, including, by the way, on the environment. So if the David Suzuki doctrine holds, but for the 100 million, you would still say Canada wants to move the world on environmental debates. We still need that term-setting mindset, and that is patently absent in Canada on a host of fronts, with very few exceptions. So let me leave it at that. I think there are very powerful arguments, and there are some powerful arguments against, but they can be overcome. So my vision of 100 million has a lot of nuances to it that sometimes are not appreciated.
Right. And can I just insert something here? Myself, I'm just so sick and tired of Canada and the US, we could say, specifically. The whole left and right thing has it's gone nuts in the last few years. And I'm kind of old, so I remember in the 70s, in the 80s, maybe I was just too young and too dumb that time, but I don't remember people being at each other's throats as much as now. And I don't know if it's social media. I don't know if it's hackers, just faking online identities and saying this and saying that. But it's really vicious. And for most of the issues, including this one, I was thinking today, I had this weird fantasy. I was thinking, what if we abolish all of Canada's current political parties and then start fresh, start new, get rid of this right-left polarization where one party gets in, they're like, okay, let's get busy for 4 years, and just God forbid that the other party gets in 4 years because they'll undo everything we've done. And it's just kind of this rat race to the bottom every time where you just can't get anything done. There's no long-term planning. And of course, you see in the US right now, it's exactly like that. Whereas in other countries, it's not a weird thing to have 5 and 10-year plans, maybe even 20-year plans. So anyways, this is just my private hope that we could get beyond this. I know it's very unrealistic, but I do think of it at times. So do you ever have those thoughts, Irvin?
No, not
okay. You're way more
side,
realistic than me.
Yeah, on the party side, I think we're always going to have parties. The parties in the Western framework have the universal challenge of having to think long term in the context of very short term election cycles. So that's a major Western challenge, especially as we touch against Asian and what I call algorithmic societies, planning societies. Some of them more competent than others, but some of them very good at what they do. And they may not have the democratic feedback that we have, but they have the long-term perspective. And if you talk about climate change, and maybe we'll get to this, some of my arguments on the Arctic, those are not things that are solved in one election cycle, and certainly not in a tweet, God forbid. They require real planning and strategy. And so in all cases, it behooves the political parties and leadership in the parties, and the prime minister and government and senior public leaders across the country to push towards creating a long-term strategic consensus. And that is today in Canada not only non-existent, but we're in a state of confusion because of the COVID crisis about exactly what's happened. So we're not even asking the right questions in many cases, and then for of course as a secondary consideration, what's to be done.
Right, exactly. I do have to say, I don't know what you think about this, but I'm kind of proud of your Premier Doug Ford, what he did in the early days of the pandemic. I don't know if this is kind of forbidden to say this, but I was watching him last year thinking, oh my God, what's going on? And then during the COVID crisis, I'm like, okay, now here's somebody who has adapted his political platform, his actions to the current science, the current situation, and he's doing what he should do as a leader. So I don't know, it's July now, so maybe that's come undone by now, but I do have to say, I would love to see politicians adapt to reality and nature and things that actually are happening on the ground. And when that happens, I think we can get a lot more done, and we can collaborate with a lot more people. So anyways, in BC, we're in a different situation here. So, yeah, I know I have to be careful when I talk to Ontario people talking about politics, but anyways, yeah, I was just, I was impressed by some, like, of course, there are a lot of leaders, you see them online, and they're just responding horribly to COVID, and it's just, that's almost symbolic of the way they respond to other issues. But when people use what they call an evidence-based approach, I think that the future will look brighter if that would be taken into place. So now your argument, it seems like it was originally from 9 years ago that it was blowing up online, but what would you say has changed from, say, 9 years ago till now? Like, is this argument becoming more or less relevant?
I would say it was always relevant, but it was probably more abstract before three dynamics, I would say. One is obviously the COVID dynamic puts into sharper relief the precariousness of Canada even as a thing, that Canada will survive to the end of the century untouched, unscathed, untransformed is not obvious. So people now understand what it is to have a country, a really good country, a great country like Canada, and one that functions and that can, when pressed, fight for its life. So 100 million is now put in stark relief as one of the possible inputs. Again, 100 million being 85 million or 110 doesn't matter, but in the mix, and I think for reasons we'll explain, the net arguments are on the favorable side of the ledger by far. The second dynamic is I think, a much more granular sense that the Arctic space is opening up, and that is just an objective reality. It's not something invented on Facebook. It's not something that's overstated, and it's not something that's reversible. So the Arctic space is opening up, and for your listeners to appreciate, because even British Columbia doesn't know, let's say Yukon, just north of British Columbia, most British Columbians don't have a good sense of that northern reality, let alone NWT, Nunavut, and then our Arctic waters and the whole Arctic space. Our Arctic territory in Canada is 40% of the entire country, and it is as big as Europe, as big as the European Union, full stop. Yukon is as big as France. NWT is as big as France, Germany, and Ukraine combined, and Nunavut is bigger than both of them. All told, it's as big as Europe, with a population of 115,000, which is about as big as Ajax in Ontario and some smaller towns in British Columbia. 115,000 spread across a territory the size of the European Union that's now opening up. the permafrost is melting, the sea ice is melting, and it's going to have all season competition and transport and exploration there. So we're going to need just many, many more people to manage that territory. That's just an objective fact. It cannot be spun in any other way, and you can't make it into a provincial park or national park and presume that the job is done. So before we return it, let me just say that 100 million now becomes less scary, because you say a good chunk of that is going to have to accrue to the north, and not just the Arctic territories, that those three territories we discussed, but major cities and towns and territories below that Arctic belt are also need to become more populated in order to support that additional activity. The third, I think, thing that puts the 100 million into sharper relief is the rise of great power competition right at our doorsteps. Obviously, the United States, highly changing today, I would say radicalized politically on both sides, well, at least two sides of the spectrum. And then China, the return of China to centrality in international affairs, just west of British Columbia, quite close to Canada, actually, through Prince Rupert, or through Whitehorse in the north, much closer to us than to Australia, and Russia to the north of us through the Arctic. So those three great powers, right at our doorsteps, I call them our neighbors, plus Europe to our east, and then Canada gets caught in this quadrant, which I call ACRE, or America, China, Russia, Europe, and they could put a very quick squeeze on us and choke us to death, or they could tear us apart if they pull the other way. So Canada needs to not just be more clever and much more cunning in managing these great powers at our doorsteps, but will need to be much more capable in terms of assets, and population is certainly one of the major assets we'll need.
Right. Now, I had sent you a link, and it was basically saying that there's been so many studies. They come out, it's like almost weekly. And this one, what was it called? There's a peer-reviewed article saying Future of Human Climate Niche. And it came out, what was it? The name of the pnas.org website. So anyways, it's one of these things that says 50 years ago, basically the conclusion is that a lot of places will just be uninhabitable. They'll just be too hot. Everybody's air conditioner will break down, and they just have no choice. So climate migration will be, it's already a thing, but it's going to just make people leave, like in the millions. So it's like we're going to end up taking millions of climate migrants or other migrants or refugees from wars and conflicts, whether we plan for it or not. So I'm just wondering, what do you think about that?
Well, I can't speak definitively on which parts of the world will become habitable or inhabitable, flip sides of the same coin, but I speak to our Arctic, which will become more habitable, and that opens up into and by the way, which will need more people. The people will come from somewhere, and that's for us to choreograph. By the way, they could come from other parts of Canada, an idea that's underappreciated, even in the 100 million construct, that everyone presumes that they'll come from outside. Whereas I say, there are many ways to grow a population, and internal migration is definitely not to be excluded. So Torontonians may go seek work, including after the COVID period in Nunavut. Same with Vancouverites and Victorians and Abbotsford. But in the Arctic space, it becomes more habitable, not just on our side, but for about 3 billion people now. You've got the United States, you've got Russia, the north of Russia, which is as big as ours, bigger actually, the Northern Europe and their territories, and you've got parts of Asia all of a sudden that become much more economically vital because the Arctic becomes so relevant, and all these. So this becomes a highly populated area that will need to be regulated, and in which countries like Canada will have to step up to set the terms of the game, and we'll need more population. So it's not connected necessarily to whether parts of Africa or the Middle East or Asia become more or less livable. I still think those are abstract considerations for Canadian planning. They may or may not. We ought not to discount human ingenuity in making some places still attractive. Look at Dubai, look at Singapore, and of course in the reverse, look at the north of Canada. It's also once considered uninhabitable, and it's got some of the most educated people in the country. So I don't want to be absolute on the one hand about climate change future, but with respect to the Arctic, I think I'm on solid ground in saying that Canada needs to make some major moves.
Right. Now, I took a course, it was like last fall, from Yukon University on climate change policy. We did lots of research and studies on the permafrost up there. And it seems like now, just say the current situations with a lot of First Nations and settlers up there, that it's tough because food security is an issue as it stands right now. Even people say going hunting, and then the changes with all the animals outside, and just the permafrost melting has made it really hard for highway systems and everything. But as you're saying, I think we're probably, if we, I guess you could say, throw enough money at it and throw enough ingenuity at it, that we could actually bring up good solutions so that we could have more people going in there. Is that right?
One, we could, and I think two, we'll have to. I mean, imagine a counterfactual situation where we don't do anything, where we keep our 115,000. We say, well, what will America do in the next couple of decades as the place opens up, and as, let's say, their security concerns grow? They'll definitely ramp up, and much faster than we could ever have ramped up. And they'll probably do it in our name, under an American integument, on American terms. So that's one scenario. How would the Russians behave? Well, the Russians are already very ramped up in the Arctic. They have a big Arctic imagination. They're very both capable and capacious there, and they're going to keep putting assets up there. And I don't, by the way, I don't see them on the Russian side as necessarily or inevitably hostile. They're just doing what countries do, given strategic considerations, and we ought to do the same. And then we'll meet each other at the coalface of the Arctic and figure out what the relationship will be. China will be ramping up, the Europeans will ramp up, and every serious country will ramp up. And if we want to be a failed state at the north, then we'll keep 115,000. We'll say that we're pure, but that will condemn us either to a form of deep vassalization, poverty, or even annexation coming up. And I say it quite bluntly, because annexation was maybe before 2014 thought not to be du jour, but today it's very much in the air and part of the strategic currency of a lot of countries. So a vision I commend. I think it's coming out imminently in policy options, and might be out already when this podcast airs. And I'll repeat it because I made some public interventions on it. Is that Canada will, in the coming decades, build one or two major Arctic hub cities in the north. Let's say you take one of three candidates, Whitehorse, Inuvik, or Yellowknife, and make them the Singapore of the Arctic, first of its kind, and thereby connect Canada through transportation, economics, science, cultural exchange, people-to-people exchange, academic exchange, and obviously commercial transactions, connect us to a market of over 2 billion people, including Northeast Asia, but obviously the continent, North America, the Eurasian space, and the European space. And if we become the pivot there, then that becomes a much more dynamic market, actually, than the South, where we think everything happens at the American border. That's a 330 million person market for us. Okay, let's add Mexico. But if you do the calculus on what the northern market looks like as climate change happens, and if we build properly and set an architecture there, it's 6 times larger than the American market alone, but includes the American market, and that can be ours. So a lot of the action will be through the north, and this is not a frozen north. This becomes very much, it approximates the south through intense air travel, sea travel, road travel, supply chain, but also science, climate change action, and all this stuff, and obviously indigenous interests wound up there intimately. I think it's a very exciting vision, but it really is also important now because it's one of the ways to get us out of our deep COVID crises, the several crises, really something that's system and countrywide rather than a niche idea.
Right. One of the reasons I invited you here is just that I see myself as an amateur futurist, and I like people who think outside the box and look into the future. And I'm kind of like that, even though people criticize me for it and tell me to shut up and go and make some money, Vin. Just stop dreaming. But I just think it's really important to look at things from try to be like realistic about it, not just like trying to make a climate fiction novel or something. Now, Alaska population, I'm looking here online, it says U.S. Census Bureau says it's basically 731,000 as of last year. Mm-hmm. And you were saying Northern Canada is what? It says here in 2016, 113,000, but you were saying 150,000 probably.
115.
Okay, so 115. So I worked up in Alaska in I'm super old. 1985, 1986. Sorry, on the border, Yukon and Alaska. I traveled to several cities in Alaska and in Yukon, and they're way more developed. They have the infrastructure and everything. And people
on the American side.
Yeah, in Alaska. And then people will say, well, I mean, it's got a nice coastline and it's, close to the Pacific Ocean. They have way more, it's like a better strategic location. And it's like, well, really, is it? We have to not put down our north because it's doable, as you're saying. It's doable to put in the people, put in the infrastructure. If Alaska can do it, then why can't we do it? So is that actually a good argument, or?
Well, of course, and the only thing I would say is we have to broaden our mental map beyond Alaska. We need to look 360 degrees at all countries, and one of our great strategic weaknesses in Canada is that we always do the Canada-US comparison and we stop. Mm-hmm. But in the Arctic space, we really are 360 degrees. So the Americans are our neighbors. Let that be a first comparator. Yeah, they're much more capacious. Alaska's very endowed with assets. Mind you, it started even before Confederation. There was a Russian presence there. At Confederation, the Russians sold it to the United States, which was the enemy of Canada at the time, and because the Russians were enemies to the Brits, so that there were already assets and there was certain infrastructure there. The Americans, in their brilliance, scaled that up fantastically, and they did a lot of the scaling for us in the north as well. A lot of the assets in NWT, Nunavut in particular, are American World War II legacy assets, and they're builders, and we have to become builders on that scale. And so the Americans are not our great example. But if you look at the Russian side, so if you flip the Canadian population distribution and contrast it with the Russian one, the Russians we're 38 million. So imagine three tiers, east to west, dividing Canada. You've got the bottom tier on the American border, which is 35 million in Canada. The middle tier, which has cities like Fort Smith in British Columbia, all the way to Churchill, Manitoba, and going east, you have 2 million people in Canada. And then on top of that, you have the 115 million we talked about through this European-sized Arctic swath, 3 territories, 115,000 equivalent to Abbotsford, British Columbia today. On the Russian side, if you go bottom third, middle third, top third, they have population in total of 150 million approximately. The bottom third is 100 million. So that's cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Ekaterinburg. And then the middle is 50 million, and their top swath is over 2 million. So the Russians are the most capacious there, and although their national population is shrinking, big problem there, they're going to want to grow because of the Arctic opening, which is just as lucrative for them as it is for us, both in economic and strategic terms. So of course we can do it. We did it in our west. Now we're going to have to do in our north. It's the next big demographic push in Canada. Now a question of choreography and really political courage.
Right. Now, is there a way that we can talk with First Nations and get them on board? Because give you an example, I remember over 10 years ago, I visited some First Nations, and in the beginning I thought, okay, you must like immigrants because they're not always European and it makes everything more diverse. But I was really surprised. Some of the people I talked to, they were like, they're not really into immigration. They were, because some of the people I talked to, they felt it was kind of like competition, right? And now a lot of the resources and authority and other things are going to go toward the immigrants and not toward us as First Nations. So I was thinking, wow, this is a really complicated issue. So do you think there's a way to get First Nations people on board with this rather than giving them the alternative of saying, okay, we become a failed state, we have a dwindling population, and it's even going to be worse?
I think you got to make the argument with them. And I'm actually, my sense is, in both speaking with them and speaking with colleagues who speak with them regularly, is that in most cases they can be persuaded that it is in their interest and in the regional interests and in the national interests alike. So the argument needs to be made, and the converse scenario needs to be presented quite boldly, which is that we all become poor and threatened, and including sovereign indigenous territories, so sovereign indigenous government in the vast Arctic territories. So I think that case needs to be made quickly, not at what I call a Canadian pace, a snail's pace. We do it over the course of decades, a century. It needs to be with purpose, and there need to be structures in which they're incorporated as decision makers and partners. Essentially, we all become safe, wealthy, and term setting together, and everyone wins approximately. And I think that can be done. But again, it requires great political heroism. And I think I fear that this across the political spectrum right now, where the political imagination, our political courage is not à la hauteur, as they say, for the times, particularly the post-COVID times. The Arctic is a scary place, in my view, not so much meteorologically, but in its scale. Like the idea that we have to do something on that historical scale is scary, particularly for a Southern thinker, for Vancouverites, for Torontonians, for Montrealers. And yet that's how it has to be done. If we populated the West and settled the West and made the West prosperous based on activity that was mainly happening in central Canada, then we can do north from the south, and there will be a big migration of talent and people to the north, starting with young people, for whom I think the north is very exciting. That's also misunderstood, that the young people of Canada, particularly post-COVID, want a dream, and there's no more exciting dream than that the north presents their future for them.
Right. So this is under the presumption that we will be able to make that decision, or will want to make that decision. Now, there's a book I read last summer. It was called Climate Leviathan by one fellow from Simon Fraser University, Dr. Jeff Mann, and another person named Dr. Joel Wainwright. And they basically said that to deal with climate change and all of the extreme weather events, et cetera, that there's going to have to be almost like a one world government. So I know everybody who reads the Bible, Book of Revelation, are trembling, right? Oh, it's the Antichrist going to come up in 7-year tribulation, one world government. But realistically, there's going to need to be more central decision-making, collaborative decision-making between Russia, China, US, Canada, everybody. And who knows what these countries will look like in 10, 20 years. But
Right.
there'll have to be more joint decision making. So maybe Canada will be giving it up to a central authority where we seat at that table. We have a seat at that table, and we will get 100 million people, but it won't be just us deciding out of Ottawa. It might be deciding out of some other world capital. So do you think that could be a
I
possibility?
don't think I'm not. I don't think there's any inclination, any national capital, starting with ours in Ottawa, to have a world government. That is an academic fancy, and I don't think it has any future at all
Anything
this
realistic
century.
there?
No, but what
Okay.
is obvious, I mean, well short thereof, is that a civilized Arctic, that is Arctic that is not a battlefield in kinetic terms amongst the great powers, all of them nuclear, an Arctic that is heavily polluted, an Arctic that has no law and order, an Arctic that is either broken or in which indigenous populations become impoverished, and so on. All of these dark scenarios, the only way to avoid them is through intergovernmental amity and cooperation amongst all the Arctic countries, and then some. So there I would pitch the other thing I'm pitching, both in this article and in my recent videos and interventions, and through our institute, the Institute for 21st Century Questions, that post-COVID, the first major international institution can well be a new Arctic League. I call it an Arctic League, and let Canada lead it, but it would have all the great powers at our borders. Obviously, the Arctic powers, the United States, Russia, but also of Europe, leading European countries, but also maybe as annex or honorary members. But membership is not the most important thing. The important thing is coordination and civilization. But you would obviously want to incorporate China, Japan, the two Koreas, maybe parts of Southeast Asia, a major trading country like India, and so on. And why not the world eventually? An Arctic League, because you can imagine that as the Arctic opens up, you'll have to have huge trade and commercial activity, and it needs to be regulated. People think about the sea, but let's start with plane travel. You can imagine plane travel from Whitehorse to Irkutsk in Russia, or Inuvik to Chicago, or let's say Yellowknife to Shanghai, or Fairbanks, Alaska to London, England, and so on. And this would be very transpolar rich and very intense travel by air, and then by sea, and obviously by road, connecting all these nodes, and so on, and everything that comes with that: the universities, the hotels, the research institutions, the big businesses, the culture. That needs to be regulated heavily, and I recommend a structure called the Arctic League, which is thicker than the Arctic Council. And maybe you can build it out of the Arctic Council, or it becomes a new structure. And it is really a new vision of international peace through the most unregulated new geopolitical space of the post-COVID period that opens up through climate change.
Right. I'm looking, actually, there's something, the Arctic Council you were saying, right? And there's also a, it's called what, Inuit Circumpolar Council. So they're
Right.
one part of the Arctic Council. So
Right.
there are already some embryonic stages, some,
Yeah.
we could say, tables that people are seated around. And these things could just be ramped up over the next few years and get more authority, more cooperation from central governments. That's what you're imagining.
That's one way. You could either get either they ramp up, or you say that one of the problems with the Arctic Council is that it's consensus based, and it's very soft touch. So it's a forum, but it's not. It doesn't have a muscular mandate to actually regulate all of these dimensions of activity that will come to pass in an Arctic that opens up. So it might be an Arctic Council stage 2. An Arctic League is much more kinetic, because then you have trade involved, and you have polar air travel and sea travel, and you have the huge infrastructure development between all the powers. So imagine, how are we going to build up our north? Where are we going to get the money for that? Canada, I'm speaking of Canada. Well, some of it will come from Canada. Some of it will come through partnerships in North America. Some of it, frankly, will come through partnerships with China and Russia and Europe. And all of these things are eclectic partnerships, and they need to be managed and overseen, and there's to be stewardship. So that complexity, I don't think, can be managed in the culture of the current Arctic Council, although it's done its work, and it is a Canadian creature at its genesis. We need another one, another push. So here's a way to help ourselves in the Arctic, but also help the world, which, aside from our crises in Canada, is really going through some dangerous straits post-COVID because of deep mistrust amongst the great powers, delegitimized international institutions, diminished touch points across the societies and civilizations. So Canada could play a major peaceful role there.
Right. So when you're talking about, it seems you are concerned about what's going on in the world situation today that would actually be a big barrier to all of this. So do you think what do you think needs to happen right now to kind of get through this kind of blockage that we've run into?
Well, there are 100 things that need to happen, but in the end, it will come down to human leadership or the lack thereof that gets us somewhere or doesn't. And we have to start with the three major powers of the day, so the United States, China, and Russia. I think they're pretty uncontroversial. And then you have secondary powers, some in Europe, India. I would put Canada in that camp, Japan, the two Koreas, and so on. But Turkey, Iran, Nigeria, Indonesia, Brazil. But the major point is the three major powers have a veto on what the look and feel of the new post-Cold War, COVID world will look like. And for now, they don't get on at all. They don't trust each other. I think the relationship between Russia and China is much closer than America is to any of them. But triangulate and there's great discord and distrust there, and that distrust is consolidating now. The leadership of those three powers is pushing in the opposite direction. And so it's not a very good future that awaits us. Enter a country like Canada that can help perhaps bang heads in a theater like the Arctic, and that will require us to be less ideological, less dogmatic, and less pure, between quotation marks, to really understand what the sweet spots are to get those peaceable touch points between these great powers that could both threaten the world and, of course, with that, us.
Right. I'd like to see after COVID that, I don't know, it seems, as you're saying, that we have the world powers kind of pulling in opposite directions now. And I used to live in Asia for 6 years. And then I also had lots of friends from Russia. And I've done a lot of research on Russia, China, etc. And it just seems like, there was this film years ago called Red Dawn, and they were saying, oh, what if Russia invaded? And wasn't it Patrick Swayze? Anyways, and then later they redid it with China as the villain. And then I guess some China movie studios complained, said, oh, let's put North Korea in there. But I was thinking the other day, it's totally unrealistic. Any countries taking over any other countries. It's just, even puppet governments these days are kind of unrealistic. So at the end, I think all these superpowers are going to have to say, the only way for a win-win situation is collaboration. So I hope they will reach that consensus sooner rather than later. So anyways, that's my 2 bits on there. So I'm wondering, Irvin, what's your latest iron on the fire beside this theme?
I'm doing a lot of writing. I've got 2 books in the works, maybe 2.5. One is on what I call the consequences of the pandemic. These are global, and then another one which I've altered from the pre-pandemic look called Canada Must Think for Itself: 10 Theses on Canada in the 21st Century. And those are separate books. And then I got another book that's more in the fictional realm. That's on the writing side. I do a lot of writing for newspapers, sometimes some longer research articles. I had a think tank that tries to solve problems in Canada and around the world. So we're going to do 2 major virtual conferences this fall. One on the future of Canada post-COVID. So please do participate in that. We'd love to have you and report on it. And then one is on the future of the world post-COVID. So those are, we'll have who's who in both conferences. So that's exciting. I had Global Brief magazine, so we continue to publish. We've been in print for over 10 years, and we're very active online in a number of languages, and we're the major international affairs magazine out of Canada and are very followed around the world, quite influential actually. Then I do a lot of public interventions, and I'm very worried about the country. So if I may just return to the country's problem, we have
Mm-hmm.
Full 6 buckets of problems now, including but well beyond the COVID crisis. The COVID crisis launches such these problems, but so it's the first bucket, the public health bucket, but it's now the minor problem in Canada, in my view. It's still monopolized the headlines and the political attention, but it's the minor problem amongst 6 great problems. So public health. The second one is huge economic, fiscal, and business structure problem across the country, massive. Uh, 3, you've got a growing national unity problem with the West and Alberta in particular upset, but now watch for some reverberations in Quebec from some possible decisions on French language study in the Toronto District School Board, the biggest school board in the country, because of COVID. So that is a wicked problem that could really rear its head. Not to mention the indigenous pulls across the country, different grievances. The fourth one is a huge educational crisis across the country, which will come to a head in September in British Columbia, as in Ontario and in Quebec and in other provinces. Then you have an institutional crisis, that is, most legislatures and parliament in particular are just not functioning properly. They're not providing their feedback role to power in the COVID context, and so you have the great advantage of democracy failing in Canada now, which is that not just holding governments to account, but helping to shape policy solutions, helping the ground reality to reach centers of power and decision making. The media is in free fall across the country, in print, on TV, online. So we're all on different pages in Canada. We don't have our own information space. The idea that all our national leaders are on Twitter and getting their message across on Twitter or following Twitter is really a national absurdity in the end, because we don't control our own imagination. We're really just importing random debates from abroad in English and then imposing them on our reality. So that's an institutional breakdown. And the final one, of course, is stuff we were talking about, the international crisis in Canada. The American border is closed for all intents and purposes. America is increasingly radicalized, approaching its presidential election, the outcome of which is unclear. The China situation is very hot. Russia is an unfriendly border to our north. The future of Europe is uncertain. So that's a very difficult squeeze for us. And not to mention the borders that divide us internally, interprovincially for the first time in modern history. So 6 buckets of crisis, and they're very, very serious crises. And I really think that we're not even seized of our circumstances yet. And we're going to really require better analysis and really systematic thinking. A lot of the crises that are now consolidating, because that's my work to look into the future. And I just don't think still we're seized of the pain that's to come. And in the end, as I mentioned, I think throughout this interview, that the answers will come through political leadership and heroic leadership and political imagination. There's no other way to really move the country fast. We have wonderful people in Canada. We have a highly educated population, but the push, the pressure, and the creativity will need to come from the top. So I'm cheering for all the parties on the Conservative side, especially now, to help the country move in that direction.
Right. Well, I hope that maybe my fantasy of abolishing parties and starting up a few new parties is just totally unrealistic, but I hope the parties will just move beyond, tightrope walking and things like that. And we need to work on these issues, all these buckets you're saying, right? We can't be fighting each other. We're so busy fighting each other that the buckets get untouched, right? So I really believe in the things you're saying, and I'm just wondering, what's the weather like out there?
It's great. It's been great. It's been a very consistent summer, extremely hot, and befits Toronto, very humid.
Okay.
So it's the one virtue, I think, for kids who I think have had a difficult time of the quarantine, if anyone, is that they're going out and playing, and they're actually getting more physical activity, I hope, than they would have in a regular summer. At least in the parts that I see, in Richmond Hill, where I live in particular, is a lot of kids really enjoying the outdoors, the great parks, the perfect weather.
Okay. They go out there to get relief from the humidity and the heat indoors, or?
I think they go there because they're kids, and they've just developed momentum in that direction. And,
okay. Well, anyways, our place is just roasting here. We've never needed an air conditioner, but we're finally hitting the point in summer here in British Columbia, where in Vancouver, where we have to get an air conditioner soon. So I'm a holdout because I lived in Asia, and we had that AC blasting all summer long, and I kept getting sick.
That's
so
you
I'm
get
like,
sick. Yeah. It's not great.
So, well, thank you so much for coming in, and sorry that I sound so kind of sun.
No worries. Good luck on this, and good luck editing. I hope you do a great job and do.
Well, I want to be one of those
our
voices, so I really like your thesis, and I wish you the best for this, and they're rooting for you.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you so much then, Irvin, and have a wonderful day.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks and hello to everyone in British Columbia.
Okay, take care. There it is, a very eye-opening interview with Irvin Studin. Thank you again, Irvin, for being such a great guest here at the Multi-Hazards podcast. So a little disclaimer here added to the end of every single one of my episodes. This podcast is meant to be educational and does not try to offer legal, medical, or other specific advice unless otherwise noted. Also, the opinions expressed here by me, the host, or my guests do not necessarily reflect those of the organizations that we belong to. So, here as I conclude this episode, I want to give all of you a special thanks for being here today with us on this journey. Stay safe out there and stay tuned for more. This is Vin Nelson wishing you all the best on your journey of surviving and thriving with all that life throws at you. Cheers to you all. Peace out. You're the socks off blessed ones, mighty and vulnerable, filthy rich and not so. You're the targeted ones, you're the ones I'm calling. You're the ones I'm calling, yeah. Mark my words, learn to burn, passion and action. Doing what's right will become your satisfaction. Do it now.